In what could only be described as a moment of like revisiting my teenage self, I just spent the last like week obsessed with the Hunger Games. It started because I read Sunrise on the Reaping and unexpectedly loved it, and then I didn't want to leave the world, so I like watched all the movies back to back as background viewing, I have to say. And I thought about reading the books, but I just like couldn't put myself through it. So I rewatched all the movies. I thought it would be fun to discuss the new book and yeah, just like have a trip down memory lane about something that was so iconic and really formative for so many people like myself. If we've not met before, hello, I'm Rose Confetti. I make videos from my pastel office, and honestly, usually they're about whatever's been on my mind. And this week that has well and truly been the Hunger Games. And I should say this video isn't going to be like a super in-depth deep dive, more of a chit chat, more of a catch up for anyone who has recently read Sunrise on the Reaping or is wondering if it's worth a read, and then talking about my reflections on the Hunger Games movies as someone who like lived through their release at like the peak age that you wanted to be living in that world. So jumping right in with Sunrise on the Reaping, if you have not read it, maybe skip ahead 5 minutes. I mean, we do know how it ends. We know that Haymitch ends up winning the games. We know that he's struggling with some kind of PTSD. We know that it's going to be sad because he's really sad in the Hunger Games. We know he's going to struggle with alcoholism. So like, we do know kind of where the book is going to end, but we don't necessarily know how we're going to get there. For myself personally, I really enjoyed going into this book having no expectations. So yeah, if you want the experience of going into it relatively unaware of what's going to happen, maybe skip ahead a little bit. But for everyone else, let's get into it. First things first, so fun getting back into the world of like the Hunger Games. Really sad. I want to make that very clear. Very, very, very sad. What a sad book. But just like the feeling of revisiting a world that I used to know so well was really, really satisfying as a reader. So the first Hunger Games book would have come out in about 2008, and I reckon I read them in about 2010, 2011, and I would have been around 15, 16, which is a similar age to the characters in the book, which I really think made it so like formative for me and so many other readers who are about the same age. But like that was a long time ago, so I really appreciate that this book started on Reaping Day. It was in District 12. I mean, we knew that was going to happen, but just the fact that it was in the district that we know, the setting was really similar. It was described in a similar way to how it was in the original books. It was a world that we know, and I really felt like it just hit the ground running. Off the first couple of pages, I was already like, yep, I know where we are. I know what it looks like. I know kind of what to expect from this place. I know the reaping is coming up, and it just let me get immersed in the story really, really quickly, which I do appreciate. Starting it off with Haymitch like excited to see his girlfriend. It's his birthday. You get the interactions with his mom and his brother. Like, yeah, knowing what is to come and knowing regardless of how it happens that he's going to be in the games makes that really, really hard to read. Like, you're kind of on the edge of your seat being like, oh, you're about to have a really bad day, buddy. I really forgot how dystopian these novels are. Like, right off the start, we're at the reaping and someone... how am I going to say this? A character gets written off very, very, very quickly, and it does not stop. Like, so many characters are written off quickly, sometimes in a very dramatic way, and I just forgot that this series is like so hard to read, compelling, interesting, wonderful, like exciting, but it's a heartbreak from start to finish. I do think the characterization of Haymitch was really good. I liked that he was really driven by protecting his loved ones, his family, his girlfriend, etc., because that really gave him a background that we don't necessarily see in the later Hunger Games books and movies. Yeah, he goes from this like fierce defender of his loved ones to a rebel masquerading as like a rascal, and that gives him the opportunity to have like some really sarcastic comments, some good poetic justice, all that kind of stuff. It makes him a good hero of the books. And I did think sometimes that he was similar to Katniss in a way, and I think that that is nice because in the movies or the books later on, you do see them bond just a little bit because they are kind of similar, but I didn't feel like he was a carbon copy for any other characters that we've seen before in the books, which is nice. Then of course we find out that Haymitch's best friend in the start of the book is Katniss's dad. That's a really nice touch. When they drop in the Everdeen's surname, it like makes you go, oh, this is like proper connections. We're going to get connections throughout the book, and this does continue. Occasionally I was like, this is fan service, but you know what? I am a fan and I am enjoying it, and I do think it was quite consistent with the story that we know is going to happen 25 years later. Overall, Haymitch's story really reminded me of how much more depth and like growth and detail we get to characters in a book versus a movie. Obviously, we're inside his head in the book, whereas presumably in the movie later on and in the other Hunger Games films, we've seen this before, you're not in the character's head necessarily, so you don't get as much like personality, you don't get all of their thoughts. And so yeah, I really enjoyed experiencing those in the book specifically. And for me, the idea that his character as a teenager was helping to make alcohol, and then later on we know that when he goes through all of his horrible experiences, he does turn to alcoholism, depression, all of that. I kind of liked that storyline. Like, he doesn't drink at the start and it's like quite a point, and then by the end he does pick up a drink. I quite like that through line. I think it does carry through quite well to how we see him in the Hunger Games movies. I am going to keep swapping between movies and books. I know the books are the original. I read them before they were movies. I'm fully across all that. It's just I just watched the movies, so I'll probably keep swapping the words in and out, but you know what I mean. And considering how distraught he is in the Hunger Games books later on, I do think that we saw him go through enough to still be dealing with that when we get to the next set of books 25 years later. Like, his loved ones really were all that mattered to him, and he loses all of them. Oh, it is hectic. Like I said, I really liked all the tie-ins with the other books, in particular getting to see names and characters dropped in, whether that's the Mockingjay pin, whether that's the Coveys, whether that's the Everdeen surname. All of that was really nice and made me kind of excited as a reader, especially one who's like grown up a lot since the original books came out. And I was surprised by how many characters had so much backstory to them. But in particular, BT's story really broke my heart. The fact that you get introduced to Ampit and you're like, oh my gosh, what a cute kid. Sad that I know what's going to happen to you. But then when he says you're going to meet my dad, and as BT, like, that was really sad. And it did provide a nice little backstory for how later on, when BT's like in the rebellion, etc., why he's probably been helping the capital up until this point, because we know that he has been basically forced to his whole life. And just makes it so tragic. But it's a nice bit of backstory for a character that we don't get that much of later on. On top of that, when Mags and Wiress get involved, I was like, oh, this is so exciting. Like, again, yeah, it felt a little bit like fan service, but no, I'm going to give it a pass. It is just building out the world. And yeah, I was really excited to see them. Like Wiress, we know in the Hunger Games, she's the one who's able to figure out that the arena is a clock. And then in this book, we find out that when she did the games, she was like smart enough pretty much to be able to just wait it out and not have to like get properly involved in the games. Like, we get more in-depth detail about how her brain works and how she is really smart. And Mags's character too, in the third movie, can't remember which book this would have been, but she sacrifices herself for Finnick. And I'm pretty sure in Sunrise on the Reaping, she says something about her goal for the games was to like protect her district team member or district partner, whatever you want to call it. And so like for her to sacrifice herself later on just feels really like consistent with her character. I thought consistencies were good. If you were someone who did reread the other books before Sunrise on the Reaping, please let me know what inconsistencies were out there, because I'm sure there are some, but for like a casual revisiting reader, it worked for me. Especially when Effie turned up. I thought her reveal was really nice. Like, we had the two stylists, and then I think it was the end of a chapter, they kind of started describing someone coming in, you flip the page and it was in fact Effie. I thought that was really nice. And we see her even in this early book really like sucked in by the capital's propaganda. She's very like, yes, the Hunger Games have to happen, you know, they're sad, but they have to happen. And we see her like that in the Hunger Games books later on as well. So I liked that consistency. I kind of want to know like how she climbed the ranks. I know we had a few moments where Drusilla was like, I'm going to make sure that everyone knows that you styled District 12. But yeah, she ends up properly tied to District 12 in the Hunger Games. So yeah, I kind of want to know how that happened. One connection that I did have to get like clarification on via Reddit was about the Mockingjay pin. Obviously I was like, oh, there's the pin. Oh, one of the twins have it. Okay, somehow it ends up getting to Katniss. And I think the reason why I forgot how she got it was because there's a little difference between the books and the movies. So in the books, a character called Madge, a friend of Katniss's, gives her the pin. Now, when I looked it up on Reddit, it turns out that, and let me check my notes for this, Maysilly Donna, who is in the games, her twin sister Merrilee has the pin, and she marries Mayor Undersea, who has a daughter called Madge, and Madge has the pin to give to Katniss. So that is really sweet. I do wonder how that's going to work in the Sunrise on the Reaping movie, because they did cut Madge out of the Hunger Games movies. So I'm not sure how they're going to like massage that story. And then there was a character that I was like, oh, didn't expect to get all this backstory on, which was absolutely an oversight on my behalf. That character was Plutarch. I don't know why I forgot how important he was to the movies like later on, but I had fully forgotten his role. And so when we were like learning about him and having him kind of pull Haymitch aside and be like, I'm in the rebellion, like, let me help you, like, let's come up with a plan. For some reason, I was just like, oh, that's really interesting, forgetting that he plays a huge role later on in the later books of the Hunger Games original series. So having rewatched the movies, I really appreciate having seen him and Haymitch start to form this like tentative alliance. In general, I think that there's something about having learned the backstory of all these characters who were kind of a secret part of the rebellion. In the Hunger Games, when we then find out there's the twist, they get pulled out of the arena when they're in it for the second time, and there is this rebellion, and there is District 13, like, it kind of almost makes that more powerful. There's like, here comes the cavalry moment. All these people that Haymitch kind of interacted with back in his original games are now back and helping with the like 75th Hunger Games, the what do they call it? 3/4 quell? Full cup quell? I don't know. But I thought that almost makes a case for reading this prequel before the third Hunger Games movie. The movie book before the third Hunger Games book. And I know that that's not necessarily correct, but it did make me think about Throne of Glass and how people talk about whether you should read Assassin's Blade before or in, I believe, third or fourth place. The first time I read Throne of Glass, I read it the whole way through, ignored the prequel. I was like, I don't want to read about before. I need to know what's happening right now. The stakes are too high. In hindsight, it does add for emotional impact. On reread, I really enjoyed reading Assassin's Blade first. And so, aside from the epilogue, I'm wondering if you could read Sunrise on the Reaping before the Hunger Games. I certainly think for anyone doing a reread, like if you read them when you're a teenager and you want to like explore it again, I do think starting with the prequels is a nice way to start, because I think it does have more emotional impact and does like build out those characters and explain why they're there and kind of tell you a little bit more about their personalities. I think it's really interesting. Anyway, like all the Hunger Games books, Sunrise on the Reaping is devastatingly sad. The ending, when we see Haymitch's girlfriend, I don't know if it's Leonore or Leonori. I was saying Leonori in my head. When she eats those lollies and gets written off, as I will say, that broke my heart. And it was just that devastating end that I forgot is so quintessentially Hunger Games. Like, even when there is a happy ending, it isn't totally happy and it is quite sad and it really does stick with you. And although it did break my heart, having then immediately restarted with the first movie, it does work. Like, it does flow right into it. It sets the tone really well. It sets the stakes really well. So I'm interested to see how future viewers and readers of this series engage with it all. Like, do we just go in a loop? Like, do we finish the last Hunger Games and restart at the start again? I don't know. It's interesting seeing a world built out beyond what it was originally, but in such a consistent way. When I went to rewatch the movies, at first I felt pretty bad about it, just because I know that I liked the books more. But I gave myself a pass because I wanted to like enjoy this. I'm on holidays at the moment. I wanted to just be immersed in the world without maybe losing full days to reading more books. And the other reason I gave myself a pass was because Sunrise on the Reaping was announced at the same time as the movie adaptation, and they were worked on together. Like, Suzanne Collins has said in interviews that, I think she's involved in the movie in some way, but they were developed at the same time. And I just find that really, really interesting. And it makes me wonder if it's going to be more similar to the book because they were done at the same time, or if it's just that she already knows what she wants the movie to look like because she was doing it at the same time as the book. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. And it did make me wonder if The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes had a similar situation, but it looks like the book was in development. It was being written. Then the movie rights got purchased and then they got announced at like somewhat of a similar time, but I don't believe it was at the same time like it is for Sunrise on the Reaping. And from memory, I didn't really love Songbirds and Snakes. To be fair, I watched it pretty unprepared for the plot. I just had a friend over and we had it on in the background. I kind of want to go back and either read it and watch it now and see how it all fits in, especially with the Covey Snow connection. If you've read the book or watched the movie, let me know, which I should do down below. I'm kind of leaning towards book, but let me know if it's worth my time. Anyway, let's talk about the movies. So, as I said, the first Hunger Games book came out in around 2008, and we saw the first movie come out in 2012. I was in high school for that whole duration. Oh, it was the best time to be a Hunger Games fan. I remember having a Peter. Why do they say Peter like that? The whole movie, all I could think was just say Peter. Why are you saying Peter? Like, it just, I know it's written that way. You don't have to say it that way. It really like took me out of some of the scenes. Anyway, I still loved Peter. And I had a poster of him from like a Dolly magazine on my wall. I loved the books. I had the original covers. I'm sure I still have them somewhere. And it was just a really fun time to be a fan of those books. Watching them now, I feel like the Hunger Games movies were a little bit cringe. Just a little bit. I don't know. It was something about the first movie opening with like an excerpt from the book. For me, I felt like we wouldn't normally do that in 2025. It felt a little bit like spoon feeding the audience the plot, whereas we probably could have figured stuff out as we went during the movie. But that being said, honoring my teenage self, I remember thinking that was so cool. Like, it felt like it was taken from the pages of the book. Like, we open the book, you read the first page, and then the movie happens. Like, I do remember liking that, so maybe I'm being a little bit unfair on it now. On top of that, I fully forgot how much of the movies is based around the games. In my head, there was more plot before the game started and maybe like after, but this really focuses on the games. This might just be because they were the parts of the plot that I enjoyed. I don't really like gory things, so I kind of like watch the watch the games like this. So it may just be my memory warping my perception of them. Like, they're very serious movies, and I don't know why I didn't necessarily remember that about them. But this did make me think about Sunrise on the Reaping, because a lot of the plot happens before Haymitch gets into the game. Like, there's quite a lot in the training, when he meets Beetee, all of that stuff, and there's heaps that goes on in his head. So I'm wondering how that's going to be translated to the film. I'm sure they'll do a good job of it, but like, I hope it doesn't lose that insight into his mentality, into how he's feeling, all of that kind of stuff. I was reading an old review from like 2012 or whenever it was, from The Guardian, about the Hunger Games, and there was this comment about it being surprisingly chaste given the content about the war. And I found that really interesting, because as someone who reads a lot of adult romantasy, I think it's funny how YA can really draw a line where it's just like a little kiss, but then like quite graphic descriptions of like war and like violence and that kind of thing. And that's not to say that that is wrong. That's not to say put spice in YA. Don't do that. Like, keep things appropriate for ages. I just think it's interesting that there is this difference between the level of content. It's quite peculiar. The idea that it's a book about, you know, unrest, about rebellion, all of this, and there's still this like love triangle that feels quite immature, I think is a funny thing to have happening at the same time. And at first I thought it was a bit oversimplified, and I thought it's just a bit of a marketing thing to have the love triangle, or like the love triangle is like too predictable. But I was thinking about it, and like, I actually kind of enjoy how emotionally immature that love triangle relationship struggles is, because District 12, they're in Struggle Town, they're having a bad time. In the Hunger Games, they're in survival mode. During like the rebellion, they're in survival mode. They're just acting to literally keep themselves alive. If they're doing this all the time, they don't have time to learn how to like figure out a crush, or like how to talk about relationships, like figure out your feelings. So like, I kind of enjoy that immaturity in that way, because the characters, they're only teenagers and they're figuring it out. Also, they don't have like strong relationships to look up to. They only have their loved ones. They're their only thing that they care about. So it kind of makes sense to me that even amongst war, she'd be like, who do I love? Is it Gale or is it Peter? Like, in hindsight, I actually don't mind it so much as a plot point. And I think one of the reasons this was something I thought about a lot when rewatching the movies was because I think this was compared quite a bit to Twilight. I noticed that in some of the articles that I read from the time of the movie. Like, I looked them up when I was making this video. And the thing is, Twilight is a romance. Like, it is just a romance novel, whereas The Hunger Games is a dystopian novel about government and uprising and rebellion and all of this, like, with romance added. And so I do think that maybe marketing it, the love triangle side of stuff, blows a little bit out of proportion. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed the books without the love triangle because I was a teenage girl. Like I needed I needed a bit of will they won't they in there. I don't think I could have read it if it was just about like the battle of good and evil, as embarrassing as that is to admit. But yeah, I did wonder if this was made for adults in mind, like if it was remade or whatever. I do wonder if the romance would have been a bit more evolved, if it maybe would have had higher stakes, kind of bring in some of those romanticy elements. I don't know, it's just fun to think about. And when I was watching the movies, I definitely found myself reflecting on, should she have ended up with Gale or Peter? And I distinctly remember I was team Peter. And this is not that surprising because I do love an underdog. I really was team Jacob when I was reading Twilight, so I'm not surprised that I really cheered on Peter. However, I do remember finishing the books and being a bit sad that she ended up with him. Like I felt like she didn't really have a choice. And although I still think that now, I do think Peter was the right choice. Now the reason for this is because Gale is who she loved when she was in her original home. He was the one who was part of her family, basically. He's quite like her, and he reflected her life in District 12. And I just don't think after going through what they went through, she could go back to Gale. I just don't think he'd ever get it. And on top of that, I think Gale is too similar to her. I think Peter complements her. I don't know if it was in the books or just in the movies, but I found that they let Katniss look really endearingly towards Peter when he was being kind to people, and that soft, gentle side of him. And that's something that Gale doesn't really have. And so I think that Peter complements her better, and a lot of her rejections of Peter, I'm really getting excited now. I've been thinking about this a lot. Her rejections of Peter seemed to be when she was kind of backed into a corner. She didn't really get a chance to get to know him. Whereas as she got to know him, she seemed to gravitate towards him. So at the end of my essay, I think I've decided that Peter was who she should have ended up with. Another thing I completely forgot, because I hadn't watched the movies or read the books in so long, was that they have to go to the arena for the second time. I fully forgot. And this really exemplifies for me the way that Suzanne was not afraid to make the world hard to be in. She was this isn't just an evil world, it is horrible. And I think I remember reading the books and explaining it to my mum, who was of course they're doing the games again. And I was like, no, because the stakes, they're so important, because this is what can trigger the victors, people who had been living quite comfortable lives, to be no, we need to act, and empowering people who otherwise might not have been realizing that games are so horrible, kind of going, look, the Capitol actually doesn't stop. So I think it's a really good plot point to really kickstart the rebellion doing more, so we can kind of pivot the plot towards actually just overthrowing the Capitol. Look, The Hunger Games is still one of the biggest YA movie franchises ever. It's right up there with Harry Potter, Twilight, Spider-Man, all of those. It is huge, and it's really cool to see it connecting with their older audience with this prequel, and then also I guess bringing in a new audience by bringing attention to the series again. Thinking about that list of other popular YA franchises though, I do think it's interesting that The Hunger Games is up there, because it's not funny. We do get some sarcastic moments, we might get some poetic justice, but it's not funny. It's not whimsical. There's not that much romance. It's actually not that magical. Sometimes good doesn't win. It doesn't, for me, fit the stereotype of what would make a really successful franchise. Some of these are hard to watch. And I think what this is a testament to the stories themselves. So first of all, Katniss as a protagonist, as annoying as she can be, she is a really strong character. And she very much doesn't have I shouldn't say very much, but I don't think she has too much pick-me energy. She's not super soft or gentle. She can be really unlikable, but not to the point of being I'm not like other girls. She's actually just annoying sometimes, and what really drives her is just caring for her family and survival. And I do think that makes her a really fun character to care about. For me as a teenager, I remember her standing out as just being a good protagonist, and we did care about her, and she was interesting. And so I think that having her as the star of the books and the movies really helped its success. Additionally, thinking about just the first book, for example, where we're just dealing with the Hunger Games as a concept, and actually this extends to Sunrise on the Reaping as well, the idea that District 12 is the underdogs, I think helps us really care about the characters as well. We want to see them through, we want to see how they go in the games, then we want to see how they go after. So I think really creating that like underdog storyline, it makes it very appealing. You want to know what happens. Then of course this translates into like everyone else versus the Capitol, that good versus evil, that's super compelling, and there's great cliffhangers. Then finally, on top of that, when I was reflecting on these books and how I felt as a teenager and how they are now and all of that kind of stuff, I couldn't help but think Suzanne Collins isn't afraid to break your heart. And as a teenager, especially coming from reading kids' books to YA and then eventually more kind of like just adult fiction books, you really didn't want to be like coddled. You didn't necessarily want to know that everyone was going to make it to the end. And I think especially with Harry Potter, where you kind of knew that the good guys were always going to win in the end, and some major characters were written out, but for the most part you knew most people were going to make it to the end. I didn't have that feeling reading The Hunger Games, and even reading Sunrise on the Reaping, I had forgotten how ruthless the author could be about setting the stakes so high and being like, this is the reality. Not everyone's going to make it. Sometimes it's going to be brutal. It's going to make our characters really sad. Like, knowing that there was all those possibilities for what could happen, I think made readers feel like they wanted to know more. I don't know how else to describe it other than it being exciting to read and it feeling like a proper thriller, a proper cliffhanger. And I do think that's maybe why it was so successful. Anyway, now that I have gotten through all of my thoughts about Sunrise on the Reaping and the Hunger Games in general, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Did you enjoy the new book? And if you liked this video, please like and subscribe. I'm still a very new creator, obviously, so doing those things really does help out a lot. And let me know what you'd like to see in the future. But yeah, stick around. We'll see what I'm talking about next week. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.